Welcome to this Getting Started with SharePoint Framework Extensions tutorial series, and this is tutorial 2, using page placeholders from Application Customizer, aka Hello World Part 2. And this tutorial 2 continues from the steps which we performed in the tutorial 1. So in the tutorial 1, we created an Application Customizer using the Yeoman template, and then we tested or debugged or executed that in the context of SharePoint Online. So we kind of tested how the debugging of the Application Customizer actually works. Now this is September 2018 edition, so we keep on evolving this guidance and these tutorials as we release newer versions of SharePoint Framework. Now, let's actually jump in to the tutorial 2. So first things first, we want to actually take advantage of the SP Office UI Fabric Core package. And this is providing us a styling handlings. So we're able to install this package to the solution. That adds the necessary dependencies, so we're able to reference the needed code, well, technically actually needed styling in our styling classes. So we're going to use the styles available or styling definitions available from this package in the placeholders, which we will place on the page as part of this tutorial. So our objective is actually create a custom header and a custom footer, or in a technically from a SharePoint framework terminology perspective, we are taking advantage of the top header placeholder and the bottom placeholder. Now, okay, so that's now added there. Now, first of all, obviously, if you moved into tutorial 2 directly from tutorial 1, you should be breaking out from the running console and then install the NPM solution there. Now, the next thing what we want to do is to move into the Visual Studio. So let me actually open up Visual Studio Code. Visual Studio Code to be precise. And then we want to extend the placeholder control. Let me slightly zoom in this one so it is slightly bigger on the screen. So in here, we want to actually create in this Hello World folder, we want to create a new file. And the file name would be application app customizer. .module CSS. So this is our CSS file providing the styles for the upcoming placeholders, which we're going to actually put on the page. So let me actually copy the style and definition from the written tutorial, and we can quickly have a look on what are we doing here. So we are having the dependency and importing some of the styling definitions from the SP Fabric Core SC CSS file from here. And we're actually referencing those directly in the styles. And this gives us an opportunity of then associating actually to the themes which have been set for the site. So the style of the header and footer, or to be precise, the top placeholder and a bottom placeholder will be then aligned with a theme which has been applied on the site. Good, so that was the styling part of the thing. So then we actually, right now we haven't actually done any modifications yet on the code. So let me actually slightly, not increase, reduce the size. So you can probably see that still properly on the size level. Now, what we want to do, so this is now the code which we created in tutorial 1. Well, technically we didn't modify the code which was given to us by the project scaffolding. So we're just using a dialog and saying a hello from whatever the message we had actually for the property of the component. Now we want to start using content placeholders, and that means that we want to actually import or change the basic import from the SP application page slightly. So we're adding here 2 new components which we're going to take advantage: placeholder content and placeholder name. So the placeholder content is really the key here, because we are then associating content inside of the placeholder content. So we're taking advantage of this predefined places on a page, which we guarantee as a Microsoft to be there. So you can actually within your code, well, let me rephrase that. You should never ever take a dependency on a DOM structure of the page. If you request the placeholder content, and if the placeholder content exists on a page, that is the place where you should be putting your content. And we guarantee that if you're associating or requesting a top or bottom placeholder, in this case, you will get an instance on that object if it exists on the page. Now, there are certain pages where these placeholders do not exist, so we need to get prepared for that one in the code as well. Now, Let's actually then also associate or import some styling, and also escape from the speed load to dash subset. We don't have to actually worry about this one right now. This is mainly because we haven't processed our code yet, so the Visual Studio isn't aware that the app customizer module CSS does actually exist right next to that file. It is there. Can't you see that? Now, okay, so let's actually then start modifying the code slightly. So in this case, we want to actually modify this code to have two different properties, and these properties we can then set for the instance of the application customizer. So we're able to basically then change the behavior, or in this case, change the text inside of the page placeholders just by modifying the properties of the instance. So basically modifying registration of this extension. And that's now really the key. That's really the value of these properties. And obviously there could be as many properties as needed, and they could actually have a much more significant behavioral difference. So you can have a pretty generic, let's say a footer, and based on the properties which are set for the footer, it's going to start behaving differently. And that's really the key and the key thinking around the properties of the SharePoint Framework components. Now let's actually continue writing this stuff. So let's actually add two new variables in the class level. So this is the placeholder variable, which says placeholder content, and button placeholder variable, which is placeholder content as well. So we're going to associate the content to these fellows inside of the code. Now, the next thing what we want to do, we want to update the onInit code. So let's actually change the existing code because that's no longer relevant. And let's add the needed code here. So we're still doing some locking, so that's always a good practice, so you can actually understand what events are getting raised. And this logs by default can be visible in the developer dashboard. So there is a developer dashboard available for SharePoint Framework components as well. Now we also add a placeholder provider. We add a changed event. So whenever there's a changes on the existing placeholder, that code should be executed. And we also see that, let me actually slightly adjust the code just to be precise. Here we go. We want to render the placeholders in the onInit as well. Now we're missing this method. So let's actually get the method code available right underneath the onInit method inside of the class, inside of the application customizer class, obviously. And then let's actually have a look on what are we doing here. So quite a lot of code, well, not a massive amount of code, but anyway, we do some additional locking. We're looking into what are the placeholders which are available on a page. So we're kind of listing the list of placeholders, because the set of placeholders depends on the page where you are. Typically, the top placeholder and the footer placeholder, bottom placeholder always exist on a page, but there are certain exceptions. It slightly depends on the page in SharePoint Online. Now, if we don't have an instance on the top placeholder, we actually want to get the instance on the top placeholder. And then on dispose, we do a reference on the on dispose, which will add that method in a second on the code. So if we were unable to get an instance to the top placeholder using the placeholder top, we basically say, well, I can't render anything because the placeholder is missing from the page. So we're going to just lock that as an exception. So we know that when we're debugging the code. If we did get, however, the top placeholder, we're checking did we get any properties, and well, there is properties in this code, and this .properties actually has a value. We're getting the top property, and if the top property was not defined, we're actually going to have a default text here, which is saying top property was not defined. If it has a text, we're actually going to use the top property text inside of the rendering of the divs. So basically what we're doing here, as you can see, we have a instance on the DOM element, and then we are adding an inner HTML property for that one, which will then render these elements, the div elements, inside of that element. And then we do exactly the same thing for the bottom placeholder. So we're getting instance on the header section and then on the footer section, so to say, or a top section and a bottom section. Right now, when we're doing this recording, there's only 2 placeholders available. We're looking into adding additional placeholders in the future on the pages as well. And well, I'm not going to disclose any names on this video recordings on those. Now, the only thing what is actually then still missing is the on dispose. So we can actually see that that's still missing in the code. So let's actually add that one there as well, and that has to be added inside of the class. And let's actually save the settings. We can pretty much see that things should be now in order. That one still hasn't been resolved, but we should have all of the needed code available on the page, and everything should be good to go. Now we want to actually test this. So we want to test this in the SharePoint Online. So like in a similar way as in the tutorial 1, let's go back on the serve.json. And this was the file where we actually control what is the page where we want this extension to be automatically loaded from a local host. Now in this case, there's 2 different things what we actually want to now modify. Please note that you need to update the properties. Well, you don't need to, the code itself actually works if you don't do this, but if we want to actually modify and use the properties which we now updated, we should be doing following. So let's actually add bottom property and top property, and add here I'm a well, let's actually do top area of the page, and this is the bottom area of the page. And just as well, just from a consistency perspective, we are now using always the default configuration, and this is then secondary configuration. So I'm just from a consistency perspective, I'm adding the same properties here as well. So now that we are basically good to go, we want then this this property to get actually started on this particular page. So this is, let's go back on the serve.config. So this is the site pages home ASPX. So let me actually get in here, get that URL. This is my test tenant, what we're going to use today. Just requesting that page, making sure that the URL is correct. No extensions for time being. Now in serve.json, we're referencing the URL with the needed configuration. So now if we go back on the command line, and in the command line, we just do call up serve. What's going to happen is that that browser, which we last time had open in the Windows, which will then open a new tab with the needed debug parameters on that particular URL, which was on a serve.json file. And we want to actually load the debug script because we're referencing now the files from a local host. So let's actually click load debug scripts. This is mainly there as a warning if you are more as an end user and you accidentally end up on this kind of a URL and you don't want to do anything. So please do click that one. But we are as a developer, we know what we're doing, right? So let's actually load the debug scripts. And voila, we have the placeholders available on the page. We have the header section in here, top area of the page, we have the bottom area of the page, and we're good to go. And that's actually pretty cool. So now let me quickly, we don't do this in a written format, so let me actually pause this slightly. And obviously now really the key to understand the power of extension and the SharePoint framework, one of the key points to understand is really the power of these properties. So you can define these properties, for example, in a centralized location or in a site level. So you're able to modify the instance which is getting rendered on a site. So you don't want to always hard code every single setting within your extension. Again, depending on what the extension is doing. So in this case, I'm going to update the top area text, saving, and obviously now if I do the call serve, that property is now changing the behavior of the extension, which means that the end result is slightly different. And now we're rendering that particular text in the header area. Okay, so in this case, the difference isn't huge, but what if the header would have different, let's say, layout options? So the footer has different layout option. It has a bigger layout option, a smaller layout option, or behavioral changes. Using those properties, you can then configure how the extension, how the footer or header or bottom area of the page will actually behave based on, again, on a business requirement. That's really the key of understanding the power of these properties within your extension. Now, that's all we're going to do in the tutorial too. So we're able to actually see that our placeholders are on page. We are providing properties for them. We're rendering the placeholders, the top placeholders and bottom placeholder on a page using the custom rendering which we provided in our code. That's pretty cool. So let's actually move in to the next steps where we actually start deploying and packaging the code and getting that running in the SharePoint without the local host running on your computer.